Hi, I'm Nathaniel Kahn, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. There have been movies about movies, like Get Shorty, for instance, plays about plays, like A Midsummer Night's Dream, and today, a book about books. Narrowing down the top 100 in architecture is the author of Buildings in Print, 100 Influential and Inspiring Illustrated Architecture Books, John Hill. Later, we'll get to visit with and hear a great jazz vocalist, Marilyn Scott. And now, thinking about an architecture podcast about architecture podcasts, here's your host, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. An architecture podcast about architecture podcasts. Well, surely someone has thought of that already.
Yeah.
It's us.
Yeah.
We've interviewed many fellow architecture podcast hosts over the years. In our ongoing quest, we've had wonderful conversations with Francis Anderton, Donna Sink, Steve Chung, Josh Cooperman, David Lee and Marina Budarane, Bob Borson, Debbie Millman, Della Hansman, Catherine Ming, and just recently, John O'Neill and D.C. Hillier of the Perspecta. It's good to be collegial. These hosts are great guests, and we learn a lot. Almost every single one responds when we send an invitation to come on U.S. Modernist Radio. In fact, Tom, what are our stats on this?
I believe about 99% of the time they respond.
99%.
Uh-huh.
That leaves only 1% remaining. Such a small number. Practically invisible.
Uh-huh.
U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In a story we are largely making up, Angela Roll supported her family from the age of 12 through black market carpentry and off-the-books house flipping. At 18, following a scandal involving goat cheese, Chris Dahl, a Home Depot gift card, and Richard Meyer's older brother, Oscar, Angela was recruited to design school and discovered, like most architecture students, nutrient and sleep-deprived studios where the heat and the AC never consistently worked. Upon graduation, she traveled to 13 countries, visiting modernist houses and searching for the best Chinese dumplings outside of China. While sketching a house design on a napkin over meatballs at IKEA, she met the man who knew the destination. Now, Angela is a formidable real estate agent with specialized design training, advising buyers and sellers of modernist houses on everything, from appropriate renovation to the location of those amazing Chinese dumplings. Scotland. Angela Roll is your special real estate agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550. Our guest John Hill is an architect and author who really likes the number 100. One of his other books is 100 Years, 100 Buildings. And there's also 100 Years, 100 Landscape Designs. And his latest, Buildings in Print, 100 Influential and Inspiring Illustrated Architecture Books. John grew up in Chicago and he studied architecture at Kansas State University.
Go Wildcats!
He worked at DiStefano and Partners in Chicago for 10 years and then moved to New York City, getting a degree in urban design at the City College of New York. John has been writing and blogging about architecture since 1999. His latest blog is titled A Daily Dose of Architecture Books. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, John, you've really taken the first rule of book writing to heart. Always have a number in the title. Is that intentional?
No, it came about, I think, with the first one you mentioned, 100 Years, 100 Buildings, because at the time there was all these Facebook memes going around with like 50 buildings you should know, 100 buildings you should know, and I talked to my editor at Prestel, and the next thing you know, I'm writing a book, kind of version of it, but kind of putting it into a a chronological format of one building for every year. So it's just kind of an experiment in looking at a century of architecture.
Did you have to scramble at all to find a particular building for a particular year?
Well, sometimes you'd be surprised how hard it was at times to actually nail down a date for a building. Oh. It was even harder with landscapes, but just focusing on the building book, sometimes architects are not too forthright with, say, the completion date of a building, or you could say it's substantial completion versus occupancy or other, kind of ways of determining a date.
So it gives you a little wiggle room.
Yeah. But there were cases when there were certain buildings that just had to be in the book from certain years, so meant other buildings weren't in, which was kind of unfortunate.
And what do you do during, world wars and economic recessions when not many buildings are built?
Yeah, that was tricky. So at least with World War II, is looking to South America, where there was still work going on. And then, in some cases, I guess with recessions, doing a similar thing, just kind of making the scope wider. But that kind of helped in a way, because then it moved away from the kind of typical Western canon that you see in most books of architecture. Or at least that's what I hope.
Now, your new book, John, starts out with a section called Manifestos, which most people know of, say, from the Unabomber or Jerry Maguire.
Or Vladimir Lenin.
Yeah. In Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise writes that manifesto in the beginning and gets fired from his firm. So tell us, what's an architectural manifesto?
I kind of just simply state it as an argument, in the case of the ones in this book, book-length arguments for how architecture should be made, what it should be addressing. And starting that chapter kind of came about through selecting these 100 books that would be in buildings in print. And, I could have opened it up to Vitruvius and Alberti and gone back centuries, but it seemed that at least when you look at books that architects still read or that architects still are influenced by, you don't need to go much further back than Le Corbusier. So Vers in Architecture from 1923 was kind of the starting point for the book. And once you start there, you're basically taking the most famous manifesto of architecture, where you have Corbusier describing the house as a machine for living in, and kind of developing these other now famous, in some cases infamous, phrases about what modern architecture should be, between the two world wars.
And your manifesto section ends with Rem Koolhaas in his book Delirious New York. What was that all about?
Well, that book, he called it a retroactive manifesto for New York. So he was interestingly, he was looking at Coney Island in terms of the shaping of Manhattan, and retroactively looking at how New York City developed, but taking kind of this place known for theatrical aspects of fun, of light, and so on, and applying that to Manhattan. And in the book, in my book at least, using Koolhaas's book as a way of saying, okay, that was a manifesto that was not really arguing for what architecture should be. It was kind of like his book says, a retroactive manifesto looking to the past. And there was kind of a feeling at the time that manifestos were not valid in architecture anymore.
Tell us, how did you get attracted to architecture as a field, John?
I mean, it probably goes back to high school. I was lucky enough to grow up in a suburb that had high school with lots of different electives, and actually one of the ones I ended up going into was drafting, and that followed with an architecture class. And that was, I think, my junior year in high school. And not only was there architecture class in high school, there was a building trades class. So they did an annual competition, and the winner would actually have their house built by the building trades class. and then they would actually sell the house, and it would kind of help to continue to fund this program that would happen every couple of years. So the year that happened and I entered, I didn't win, but I came in second place. And it was kind of this feeling of, I kind of like this. Then applied to architecture schools and ended up going down to Kansas.
And how long have you been writing about it?
I started with blogging and all that in 1999. I edited a student journal in college. I wasn't planning on that sort of thing. I liked reading books in the library, looking at magazines and so on. But under a professor, I was able to co-edit this journal, and that kind of got me at least onto this path of using print, using words and so on, words and images together to kind of explore architecture. So when I was working in Chicago in an architecture firm after college, there was kind of this frustration on my part because what I had done in high school in terms of going to the library and looking at what architects were doing, we didn't do that in the office. The office was very, very much about only looking at the office for precedent. So I kind of created this blog as a way for me to continue to look outside, to look at the larger context of contemporary architecture.
You were saying you were only looking in the office for precedent when you were working at the firm?
Yeah, there was actually this attitude at the time that if you, say, talk about another architect or present another architect's work as an inspiration for what you're doing, the client is going to turn around and hire them instead of you.
So immature.
But it's funny because I won't take credit for this, but by the time I had left, it had changed. It had done kind of a 180, and we were actually putting together precedent boards for client meetings where we would show other architects' work.
Well, congratulations.
And that was one thing I did. Like I said, I can't take credit for it. There was, I think, a lot of newer partners and others coming into the office that were more receptive of this. But I liked being the one who was responsible in a lot of cases for putting those together.
One of the things I like about your book, John, is you've actually got photos of these books in the book. You're not just referencing them or putting them in the footnotes, but you've got pictures of the books in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in one case, there's a book in a book, and then in this book about books. So.
This is the turducken of architecture books.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Right. And another thing I like about this is that you're not just picking sort of, highfalutin, pretentious architecture texts. I mean, you've got some really interesting choices in here. Like one of my favorites which is a great one, is the 1968 AIA Guide to New York City. Tell us about that.
Well, that's kind of a classic in the genre, if you will, of guide. I mean, should mention I have written a few architectural guidebooks as well, so I kind of have a soft spot for older guidebooks, which I used as precedents when I was writing those. And the AIA Guide is just kind of famous for these kind of pithy descriptions and a very overt sense of humor, but also calling out certain buildings for questionable forms or what have you in their designs. But I didn't want to say just bring to light the 5th edition that is most recent. It was actually going back to the original one, finding a 1st edition copy and then taking photographs of that. And I should mention I took all the photographs in the book. It was kind of taking over the dining room for a few months. It was interesting for me, going back to the 1st edition, to see how the same but different it is from the later editions, how there were advertisements in the 1st edition and those disappeared in later editions, or the way the maps were drawn, or the way they included this big 2-page cutaway kind of axon of the island of Manhattan, showing all the subways and other utilities coming in and out of the island.
Is it hard to find that book now?
I think that one, not so much. I think, and you could probably get it, I don't remember how much I paid for it, but it's one that you could get fairly cheap. Probably harder is the one that came out a year before for the AIA convention that was in New York. that edition was produced for it, and then I think it was Macmillan published it 1 year later with a larger print run.
Another book you have in here is a very recent one by our past podcast guest, Beatrice Colomina, called X-Ray Architecture. What's that one about?
Well, that one is, she talks about it in the book of that when she was, I guess it was for her dissertation, she wanted to write about how things like tuberculosis influenced architecture. But for one reason or another, her dissertation ended up being about Adolphe Loos and Corbusier and how they use image, photography, books, media, and so forth to further modern architecture. And that ended up becoming the book Privacy and Publicity, which is an excellent book as well. But I was drawn to X-ray architecture just because it's a very visually interesting book, and I think a pretty interesting argument of how, in a sense, with tuberculosis at the turn of the century in the 20s and so on, and at that time, there was really no known treatment or cure for TB. So one thing that was used was it was recommended that you get sunlight, you get fresh air, and buildings provided this, and that's kind of in her argument how a lot of modern architecture was created. It's a beautifully produced book. It has a lot of beautiful illustrations and has a lot of Colomina's explorations of how architecture relates to technology.
John, tell me, I've got to ask, what do you think about Bjarke Ingels? Because he's got some great books out there like Yes is More, which seems to be pretty out there as a book.
Yeah, that's included in Buildings in Print, and it was certainly one that I was enamored with when it came out because it uses this comic book format to
you mean graphic novel?
Yes, graphic novel,
yeah.
Tom, right.
To present the work of Big. Actually, some of the comic format in that book is taken from videos that the firm produced, and Bjarke and the rest of the firm is just excellent at explaining architecture through words, through images, be it in books and comic-like images or in videos. So, you have to give him that. That was definitely a book that was, I guess you could say, influential, although you don't exactly see a lot of comic book type architecture books that followed.
I can't think of any, really. Are there some more?
There's a few here and there that I've seen. I'm trying to remember if they came before or after, though. I remember one that came out of a university in Switzerland, and they were looking at Basel, kind of doing an urban plan, and they presented that as a comic. And then there was Jimenez Lai in Chicago, L.A. He did a graphic novel, but I don't think he was necessarily indebted to Bjarke Ingels.
Okay.
But yeah, there's not necessarily a lot. But in terms of just how do you explain? Do you just stick with the convention of an architectural monograph, or do you look outside of it to bring in other conventions to find a way to explain architecture to a wider public? And that's kind of where I see the value in that book.
It seems like what you're doing, John, would make a wonderful podcast. Have you thought about that?
Not so much. I'm not as comfortable speaking as I am typing.
Oh, you're managing just fine.
Yeah, you're doing okay. With all that you know about all these books, it seems like that would be a great thing to share with the public as they come out. I think there are a couple of podcasts out there that are doing books. I'm looking. Marshall Poe has New Books in Architecture is one.
There's one that's part of like a New Books network. Maybe that's the one you mentioned.
Yep. George Bradley does some occasionally on another architecture podcast.
Yeah, and I know, I think it's Sean Lally, who's now in Switzerland, was in Chicago. He doesn't do one exclusive to books, but most of the people, he's speaking with them when they have a new book coming out or having just come out.
Now, our researcher, Carrie, came up with something that I really loved. Your fascination with architecture school deans. You put out a comprehensive list one time. What's that all about?
Can't remember. I would need to look at my blog to see when I created that. But I think I was just getting the usual emails from the usual websites and noticing that so many deans were moving around, were stepping down, and there were listings for, searches for deans. And, I write about architecture as a journalist, so I just wanted one place where I could keep track of them. So I just figured, well, I'll just do it myself. And so I did, and I created a Google News alert. So anytime there's news on architecture deans and maybe more of them stepping down or more of them moving around the country, I update it accordingly. So whenever it started some years ago, it's up to date. So I just kind of keep it as current as possible.
And so do the deans write in ever and say, hey, I've moved?
No.
Oh.
I mean, maybe they know about it, or they probably know about the blog, but not necessarily the list. But I know that for a while there were at least one website, ArchiNect, in LA. They were doing interviews. They had a kind of this dean's list.
A dean's list, of course.
Yeah, and so they would interview deans. So I would link to those. And I think I took those down because over time it was just like all those deans left. Eventually.
And if you get pictures of them, you could have a Dean of the Month calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just set up that page like a high school yearbook or something.
Yeah.
I think there's actually a professional association, John, of deans. It's like the American Academy of Architecture Deans. There's something like that they belong to?
Okay.
And they hang out together, I think, at the AIA National Convention that they all go to.
It makes sense.
And have a party.
In New York, they do an annual roundtable where they gather 15 or so deans from the city and from the other parts of the state and nearby. They get together at the Center for Architecture and kind of talk about challenges of education and then open it up to, AIA members and even I think with the pandemic, they opened up to the wider public where you can kind of watch those proceedings going on.
So, John, what is the collective noun for deans? Is it like a gaggle of deans, a conflagration of deans? What's the plural?
A college of deans?
I have no idea. I like gaggle. That sounds good.
I think conflagration is for larks, but there's always different kinds of collective nouns, usually for animals. We're not equating deans with animals, folks, just playing with grammar.
According to the internet, there are two collective nouns for deans. A decorum of deans, or, and I think this is interesting, a decanter of deans.
A decanter of deans.
That would be for your red wine-loving academic professionals.
I'd like a little Merlot, please, Dean.
Right.
John, did you have any books in your 100 list that were specifically about postmodernism? I mean, beyond the early manifestos, like Venturi?
Yeah, because in the way the book is kind of structured, there's 9 chapters, all except the first and second one. They kind of range from, say, the 20s and 30s close to the present. And like you guys mentioned, the first chapter ends with Delirious New York, and then the last chapter kind of resumes from there. It kind of creates this arc to the book, bringing the whole thing close to the present. And so that last chapter looks at what I call theories and critiques that are more prevalent now than manifestos. So in the late 70s, you obviously have postmodernism, so you have things like phenomenology, and there was this famous, or somewhat famous, at least famous with architects, convening of Philip Johnson and other architects in Charlottesville in 1982 to critique each other's work. And that was supposedly when Philip Johnson's famous statement that he is a whore came about, or when he first mentioned it. It's transcribed in the book. The book is just transcriptions of all these conversations. But then you also have, in that chapter, Tom Wolfe's From Bauhaus to Our House is certainly a criticism of modern architecture.
Oh,
and
certainly.
Kind of
He pulled no punches there.
Yeah, and a celebration of things like Philip Johnson's AT&T building that was under construction at the time.
John, tell our listeners about worldarchitects.com.
So World Architects is a website. It's done by PSA Publishers out of Zurich, Switzerland. It stands for Profiles of Selected Architects. It actually started as Profiles of Swiss Architects, started as books in the late 1990s, and then is segued online. They don't do books anymore. So it's a curated platform of architects that are practicing and serves as a marketing platform. So ideally clients who are looking for architects and clients who are interested in modern/contemporary architecture of a certain quality can find some ideas on architects that they might be interested in there. But my duties tend toward editorial content so that the site isn't exclusively these profiles. It has these other layers as well. It has job ads, agenda, and so forth. So I write some headlines, so there's news on the site, but also commission people to write reviews on buildings, exhibitions, other books, and so on.
The site is world-architects.com, and the book is Buildings in Print, 100 Influential and Inspiring Illustrated Architecture Books. Thanks for joining us, John.
All right, my pleasure.
Jazz vocalist Marilyn Scott heard Nat King Cole and Ella Fitzgerald records growing up. She started performing at 15 and sang with school bands, including when she went to college in San Francisco. Tower of Power member Emilio Castillo noticed Marilyn's talent and hired her to do backup vocals for the group. This led to more work as a session musician, working with Spyro Gyra, the Yellow Jackets, Hiroshima, Etta James, and Bobby Womack. She also appeared in a musical production of Selma. Marilyn's first single was a cover of Brian Wilson's God Only Knows, which was a hit in the U.S., and followed by the 1979 full-length Dreams of Tomorrow. Her 1991 release Without Warning was critically acclaimed among jazz writers, and her duet with Bobby Caldwell, Skydancing, was a hit in Japan, and she toured that country following its success. She signed with Warner Brothers in 1996 for the album Take Me With You. Welcome, Marilyn.
It's great to be here today.
Hey, before we get started, I remember seeing you on Arsenio Hall and going, wow, what a voice.
Oh, wow, you saw that.
Yeah.
That just led to so many things that shows you what TV does. Dave Koz was a musical director then, too.
Oh, he was? Okay.
What year was that?
I want to say mid-90s?
Oh, yeah, easily. Yeah, probably right in there.
Because Arsenio was kind of at the height of his popularity?
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like to be on that show?
Well, first I was a big fan of Arsenio's, and I knew Dave really well. And it was kind of a surprise that he had heard the tune, or maybe he saw the video. And he said that he thought that, which is an incredible compliment, he thought that it was like Nancy Wilson. And
oh, yeah.
He went to look, and it was me. And so he said, I've got to know more about her. And he had me over. So that was how it started. And then Dave, he said, yeah, I know Marilyn. We play together, and we do festivals together, and that really helped.
Tell us about your latest album.
We really just finished it. It took a little while because I started it in June of 19. And during the pandemic, when we were all sequestered, and it's really a project that's been of exchanging files. And that means that you're not in the studio with any one person. Everybody has a little studio in their home. So they can record their part at home, and then we just sort of organize the tune. What's next? We'll put a guitar on next. Okay, we'll call Michael Landau and have Mike put on some parts. And then, we add, whatever else is next. So it has taken time. This project for me is 7 tunes, and it surrounds itself with the nature of the landscape. It's called The Landscape, and there's a tune called The Landscape, and it talks about people who use nature to take care of their soul, to take care of their problems, to take care of their lives. it's an outlet, and it goes on from there. We have a ballad that I used Russell Ferrante's trio, Michael Valerio and Steve Schaefer and Russell Ferrante, and that's called Summer Night. And that's just really, being with nature outside on your porch, because nature can be right there, even if you live in the city. It could be your wilderness, in other words, if you can just feel it that way and just take time to sit with it. So that's the theme. We have one called Irreplaceable, and that's about, just trying to take care of the earth in a way that we're the host, and that we have to take the responsibility of taking care of what we have. And not to get too preachy, I have incredible friends and musicians on this that I think anybody in jazz will know who they are, and they will be really appreciative to their talent in this way, in this vein, And I've done plenty of recordings that have been about, the standard songbook. And I'm not saying I'm not going to do that again, but this time around, I just really wanted to write about what I see happening around me.
Well, we're going to hear from that album in just a moment. But right now, this next song was written by Ray Evans and Jay Livingston and was first recorded by Nat King Cole in 1956. It's been covered by, drumroll please, Nancy Wilson, Tony Tennille, Johnny Mathis, and a lot of past podcast guests like Stacey Kent, Jane Monheit, Eden Atwood, and Janice Siegel. Here's Marilyn from her 2017 album Standard Blue with Never Let Me Go.
never leave me, would you? No. You couldn't hurt me, could you? Never let me go. Never let me go. No, no, no. Don't let me go. I'll be loving you so. Never, never, never. Don't let me go. Never.
Very languid.
Nice.
Thank you.
Not many people can pull off those changing tones.
Oh, well.
Well, we know somebody who can.
Well, you don't even notice it. You just do it, because it's such a great tune. It's so melodically, it's so beautiful. And, we just play with all the harmonized changes and, then, there's just great playing all around.
Now, as you've cobbled together the pieces of the album across the different members of your crew, are you thinking about going out on the road and doing some performing?
Well, sure. I think that'll be a natural thing to do. I've got a booking agent, and I know that we're going to play. Yeah.
I hope you make it back into New York and some of the cabarets up there.
That would be really nice. And there's just so many great places to play, and so many jazz clubs did go down during the pandemic. They just couldn't make it. But I think that things are getting a little better now. And with luck, this COVID variant won't put us back down again into some kind of lockdown or something.
Our research team found out that at one point you designed baby clothes called Starting Green.
I did. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Are they still going?
Yeah, because Starting Green. No, because the bottom kind of fell out of organic.
The bottom fell out.
Oh, but it don't. Yeah, because they were all organic clothes. It was a bit much. I mean, I stayed around for 5 years, and I think the clothes were really cute. There's a lot of work, but I really loved it.
So I guess you got to the point where you had a manufacturing operation and they were turning them out.
I did. I had some beautiful ladies that made the clothes downtown L.A. I sourced the fabric. I tried to get as much fabric here in the States that I could. But, it was pretty costly, and people just needed to save money, and they weren't going to spend it on organic.
Has that changed at all? Have they gotten more used to it, or have the prices of organic come down?
I think most of the fabric now is all worldwide, and it came down. But the standard of organic fabric did change. The watchdog of it kind of went bad. And there was a lot of things I wanted to do. I wanted to make an organic diaper, too.
That would have been cool.
You start to go from one thing to the other, But anyway, that's okay. I went back and did another record to get my creativeness supplied.
Tell us about this next song, Thrown Out into Space.
Yeah, it's a sort of a plea for, tell me what I need to do. Tell me where I'm going in life and in nature. And sometimes you just feel sort of like you're not sure where you're headed. But I kind of wrote it in the sense of looking to nature to help the answers. And the same thing for the tune Landscape. It's about if you're hiking, maybe you got laid off your job and you take a hike because you just need to clear your head, That's the kind of thing, So it's a little ethereal, but it's interesting.
Here's Marilyn with Thrown Out into Space.
travel up and down my yard, and you look to see if I am watching. I have dreams of your colored avant-garde, and I'm open to all of your teachings. When solving the problems that are rough, how do I honor today's intervention? I can't walk away when I've had enough, because angels are smiling in my direction. Just this fantastic creature that God lays in the rains. I'm overwhelmed with feelings I can't explain. I've got dirt in my fingers, stars in my throat. My path is overgrown. Can you tell me why? Butterfly. I've been thrown out into space, but you hold the truth in your tiny wings. Can you tell me why? Tell me why, butterfly. And I'm thinking as you float so close, I am nothing to your perfection. Is it black or white or full of hue? Where freedom can be my expression. Such a strong light, so bright. You're like the sun with an aura that is believing. Don't leave before you expose the rhyme. Just paint it before my mind when I'm singing. It's a fantastic creature that God lays in the rains. I'm overwhelmed with feelings I wouldn't try to explain, but it's in your tiny wings, butterfly. Yeah. Can you tell me why? Butterfly. I've been thrown out into space, but you hold the truth in your tiny wings. Can you tell me why? Tell me why, butterfly. I've been thrown out into space. I've been thrown out into space. I've been thrown out into space. I've been thrown out into space, but you hold the truth. I've been thrown out into space. 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 I've been thrown out into space.
Who are you singing that song to? Is it the Butterfly?
It's the Butterfly.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that song.
Wow, that's nice. I'm glad you do.
Now, in addition to decades of great jazz, Marilyn is also a modernist homeowner with a house designed by, was it Jack Mieselman?
It's a Midsummer, yeah. It's a 1958 mid-century.
In Palm Springs.
In Palm Springs.
Tell us about the house, Marilyn.
It's a 3-bedroom, a 2-bath. It was remodeled in 2006 through 2008. We got it in 2010. It's great. It really is. It's like a little sanctuary. When you come in, you just don't want to leave. It has a typical type of architecture that they built in these subdivisions, 1956 through 1958. And there's some great examples all through Palm Springs of great architecture from those days, from the 50s and the 60s.
I had a really great time seeing your house in Palm Springs, Maryland, and you're right. The house is wonderful, and the neighborhood, too, is just spectacular.
Yes, I'm so glad you got to see it. And I hope you can appreciate, the pool and all the seating areas and just the sanctuary that it has become for so many people and to come and stay with us. So it was great having you.
One of the questions I get asked all the time is, why do you have jazz on an architecture show? And our answer is because when you go inside most of these modernist houses, what are they playing? Jazz. Exactly.
I'm sure you saw the album cover of Sarah Vaughan, which was the In the Land of Hi-Fi hanging on the wall.
Oh, yeah. Good old hi-fi.
And so when I found the record, I said, I've got to put that in the house because that's it. That's where it belongs.
Marilyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, I had a great time, you guys, and thanks again for having me.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, we're all done.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 12,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed well over 100 times.
100.
By George Smart and Robinson Earl. We didn't know you sang it live every time. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarina researches guests at least 100 times a year.
100.
U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another, what number am I looking for? That would be 100.
100.
Architecture podcasts of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Yep, we're talking about you, Keith.